Welcome back, everyone. Today's explainer is, well, it's a wild one. It takes us right across this fascinating bridge where deep, almost mystical human experiences meet the hard, empirical cognitive science of the brain. So, have you ever wondered what actually happens when the feeling of being you just stops? We're talking about an identity suspension event. Now, I know it sounds a bit like science fiction, but it's a very real, scientifically grounded psychological state, and we're going to explore this journey today through a truly unique lens. A narrative from our source material featuring a character named Fletcher and his guide, a literal dragon named Zoran. So buckle up, because what we're diving into today is absolutely going to change how you view your own mind. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the sense of I, then look at what happens when the self-generator goes offline, cover the 3 signs of suspension, discuss the dragon's warning, and finally walk through a 7-minute suspension window. All right, let's jump into part 1, the sense of I and Fletcher's realization in the cave. Okay, I want you to imagine being in a cave that feels almost like a world without edges. It's this vast, seamless field of presence. There's a fire glowing, but it feels less like actual light and more like pure being. It's right here that Fletcher, having just crossed these intense thresholds of silence and raw perception, sits across from Zoran, ready for the deepest layer of his mind to just collapse. He suddenly turns to his guide and shares this profound realization. He says that he was looking at his hands, and for a split second, they simply didn't feel like they were his. It wasn't scary at all. It was just neutral. As he puts it, like the idea of me wasn't loading. Think about that for a second. It's like your computer trying to open an app, but it just skips it. The actual program of you completely bypasses its startup sequence. And this brilliantly illustrates what Zoran tells Fletcher he's just experienced. The very beginning of an identity suspension event. This is the exact moment the default mode network's self-referential loop goes completely offline. But, and this is absolutely crucial, your awareness remains totally intact. Fletcher didn't feel like he was losing himself, right? He felt like he was losing the need to be himself. He was fully conscious, but the machine generating his character was temporarily unplugged. Moving right along to part 2. The self-generator goes offline, and the mechanics of the I. So let's transition from the cave to the hard cognitive science for a minute. How does this actually work? What actually makes up this sense of self that we lug around every single day? Well, according to our source material, your sense of I isn't some physical object sitting inside your skull. It's actually a continuous active process. It's a loop. This self-generator loop is created by the default mode network, or DMN. It's constantly pulling from your autobiographical memory, it's running predictive processing to guess what's going to happen next, it's attaching emotional tags to your experiences, and it uses conceptual labeling to name every single thing it sees. Your identity is literally just all 5 of these gears turning together at hyperspeed. But check out what happens when we systematically power down this self-generating machine during a suspension event. It's fascinating. The default mode network stays offline. Your autobiographical memory quiets down. Predictive processing softens, emotional tagging just hits the pause button, and that super tight sense of ownership dissolves entirely. And yet, through all of that, your awareness remains crystal clear.
Now, you might be wondering if this is dangerous, but this slide reassures us completely. This experience is absolutely not ego death. There's no terrifying loss of sanity, it's not dissociation, you're not spacing out, and you certainly aren't going unconscious. Instead, it's really just your identity taking a well-deserved break while your consciousness stays wide awake. Zoran tells Fletcher he isn't disappearing. He's simply experiencing awareness without costume.
Let's dive into part 3, 3 signs of suspension, or what it looks like when that self-generator pauses.
So how do you actually know when the self-generator hits pause? Well, the dragon Zoran raises a claw and 3 glowing symbols appear in the air, which represent 3 specific observable signs. The first glowing symbol is the loss of ownership. The body feels totally present and fully alive, but it just doesn't feel like mine. And because the mind isn't aggressively claiming the body anymore, the result is this massive influx of neutrality, spaciousness, clarity, and literally a complete absence of physical tension. It is the natural state of being right before the brain slaps a property of me sticker on everything.
I really love how Fletcher describes this abstract cognitive state through such a relatable human lens. He whispers to Zoran, "My hands didn't feel like my hands. They felt like hands." It's just such a simple, perfect explanation of exactly what it feels like to finally lose that heavy burden of psychological ownership.
The second sign is the loss of the narrative self. Remember that default mode network we talked about a minute ago? Well, when it stays offline, the continuous, honestly exhausting autobiographical story of me simply stops playing. You get this sudden absence of self-talk, a total absence of self-importance, and, maybe most relieving of all, an absence of the need for self-defense.
Fletcher actually exhales in the cave and says, "It felt like I didn't need to be anyone." And Zoran replies with this brilliant piece of wisdom. He says, "Identity is just a tool." And in this moment, Fletcher just simply stopped using it. It is incredibly empowering to realize that being someone is an active effort. And you know what? You're allowed to just set the tool down.
Which brings us to the third sign, stable, clear awareness. Our source material emphasizes heavily that this is absolutely not spacing out or dissociating. When the identity suspends, the consciousness that's left behind is clear, bright, completely stable, deeply grounded, and just profoundly peaceful. It feels unthreatened, specifically because the person who could be threatened is temporarily offline. So, the crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly by Fletcher again. It felt like the world was happening and I was just here. Zoran confirms that this specific feeling is the true beginning of identity freedom. You are no longer the center of the universe frantically trying to manage the narrative. You are simply the space where the universe is happening. To actually help reach this state, Zoran unfurls his wing to reveal 3 specific practices designed to increase the probability of a suspension event. First up is observer suspension. So instead of watching your experience, you just let it happen without a watcher by silently saying to yourself, "There is no observer here." Second is the ownership drop. You look at your body or your breath and silently tell yourself, "This is happening, but it is not mine." And third is the narrative pause. Whenever your mind starts spinning a story, you gently interrupt it with, "This story is optional." These techniques are specifically designed to intentionally weaken that autobiographical loop.
Now we arrive at part 4, the dragon's warning and the ego's reaction.
Now, as beautiful and peaceful as this all sounds, our guide Zoran has a pretty serious warning about this phase, which he refers to as Phase 8D. Fletcher asks a really pivotal question here. Why is this beautiful state of Phase 8D suddenly destabilizing? Why did he feel this sudden, jarring jolt right after experiencing such incredible peace?
Well, the answer lies in the deeply ingrained survival mechanics of our own minds. The ego firmly believes it must exist to keep you safe, period. So when it unexpectedly pauses, it panics. It rushes back in with full force. Zoran explains that the ego is essentially a deeply loyal servant. It just simply doesn't realize that it isn't the master of the house. So that jolt Fletcher felt, that was just his loyal servant kicking down the front door to make sure he was okay.
To soothe this panic, Zoran leans in and delivers the absolute core thesis of this entire concept. Identity is not required for awareness. It is only required for storytelling. This is something you can remind your own ego when it inevitably panics. Your underlying awareness will survive just fine without the story of I.
Finally, part 5, the 7-minute suspension window. Let's look at a practical ritual to actually soften identity.
Okay, let's move to something highly practical that you can try yourself. The source outlines a specific, actionable ritual you can use to safely induce your very first taste of this centralist consciousness. Here is the exact time-blocked routine. For the first 2 minutes, engage in whole system breathing. For the next 2 minutes, practice that observer suspension we talked about, letting experience happen without a watcher. For the following 2 minutes, do the ownership drop, deeply realizing the breath and body are not yours. And finally, for the last minute, practice the narrative pause, reminding yourself the mind's story is completely optional.
Immediately after those 7 minutes are up, the ritual asks for one final action. You've got to grab a pen and physically write down the answer to this exact prompt. What remained when I stopped being someone? This journaling step is absolutely crucial for processing the event. It locks in that softening of identity, and it proves to your nervous system that you didn't vanish. You literally just stopped being the thing you thought you were.
Which leaves us with this incredible question from Zoran to Fletcher at the very end. The fire dims, the cave leans in. He tells Fletcher that this was just Phase 8D, and that Phase 8E will take him even deeper, right into the collapse of the final layer, the sense of separation itself. So I pose this to you. What remains when you stop being someone? And are you ready for the collapse of that final layer? The dragon is waiting. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I highly encourage you to try that 7-minute window today. See you next time.